Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Friday, September 27th, 2024. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. The U.S. gives Israel $8.7 billion in military aid for Gaza and Lebanon operations. So on Thursday, the Israeli Defense Ministry announced that it secured $8.7 billion in military aid from the U.S. to support its ongoing military efforts. And that means the genocidal slaughter in Gaza and the escalations in Lebanon. That's what this is going toward supporting. The Defense Ministry said in a statement that its Director General, Major General Eyal Zamir, concluded negotiations in Washington to secure the military aid. It said the package includes $3.5 billion for essential wartime procurement that has already been sent to Israel, and a $5.2 billion grant for air defenses. The ministry said that the $5.2 billion for air defenses will, quote, significantly strengthen critical systems such as Iron Dome and David Sling, while supporting the continued development of an advanced high-powered laser defense system currently in its later stages of development, end quote. So, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin vowed on Thursday that the U.S. would continue arming Israel, and he brushed off the idea of the U.S. setting any red lines. He was asked about, will the U.S. set any sort of red lines for Israel, and this was his response. He said, quote, "We've been committed from the very beginning to help Israel provide the things that are necessary for them to be able to protect their sovereign territory, and that hasn't changed and won't happen in the future," end quote. So we don't know exactly where this $8.7 billion is coming from. I would guess it's probably coming from the $17 billion that was included in the $95 billion foreign military aid bill that President Biden signed back in April. You know, that signing that bill authorized that money, and this is how they could be spending some of it. Israel also gets $3.8 billion each year from the U.S., so some of this could come from that. But just a huge show of support for Israel amid this giant escalation in Lebanon. And here you have the Biden administration running around saying that they're pushing for a diplomatic solution for a ceasefire in Lebanon. And then you see this. I mean, it's a complete joke. And this next story here is about that. Israel rejects U.S.-backed Lebanon ceasefire proposal. So on Thursday, Israel rejected a U.S. and French proposal for a ceasefire in Lebanon and continued to launch heavy airstrikes in the country. Later in the day, Lebanon's health ministry said that Israeli strikes killed 92 people in the previous 24-hour period. So that puts the death toll around 700 people that have been killed since Monday. The U.S. and France are calling for a 21-day ceasefire, but the U.S. continues to provide military aid to Israel and is vowing to defend Israel if the situation escalates, giving Netanyahu no incentive to stop his new bombing campaign. Netanyahu's office released a statement denying reports that there's been progress on a ceasefire and vowed to continue hitting Lebanon hard and keep up the onslaught in Gaza. He said, or this is his office that said, quote, "The report about a ceasefire is incorrect. This is an American-French proposal that the Prime Minister has not even responded to. The report about the purported directive to ease up on the fighting in the north is the opposite of the truth. The Prime Minister has directed the IDF to continue fighting with full force according to the plan that was presented to him. The fighting in Gaza will also continue until all the objectives of the war have been achieved," end quote. So again, this comes after the U.S., all these officials, Biden, Blinken, all of them saying that, oh yeah, we're working for a ceasefire. We want to see a diplomatic solution. Netanyahu just trashes the whole thing. And again, the same day, they give him $8.7 billion in military aid. And now there's all these reports that said, oh, the U.S. is frustrated with Israel again because they thought Israel was on board with this ceasefire. it's just a repeat. We've seen this for the past year. That this is, just the narrative. Oh, the U.S. is just so frustrated. Biden's so frustrated with Netanyahu. If only there was something he could do. There's something very simple he could do. He could cut them off. Stop giving them military aid. Stop giving all these bombs to drop on people in Gaza and now Lebanon and in the West Bank and in Syria. But no, as long as they don't do that, this is going to continue. And all of this is just kind of a narrative that Biden isn't happy about it. It's a complete joke. So Israel's foreign minister, Israel Katz, he also rejected the idea of a ceasefire. He wrote on X, quote, "There will be no ceasefire in the north. We will continue to fight against the terrorist organization Hezbollah with all our might until victory and the safe return of the residents of the north to their homes," end quote. So Lebanon's health ministry said that overnight Israeli airstrikes in eastern Lebanon killed 20 people. Almost all of them were Syrian nationals. 19 out of 20 of them were Syrian. Israel also bombed Beirut again in a strike that targeted a residential area of the southern suburb of Daye. Lebanon's health ministry said 2 people were killed in the strike and 15 were wounded. So now it's around 700 people that have been killed since Israel launched this dramatic escalation on Monday. And last week, there's also the pager and beeper attacks and a very heavy bombing in Beirut that killed 55 people. So again, this is big, and the U.S. is completely supporting it. They say they're not supporting it, but that's exactly what they're doing. You can't give the main belligerent $8 billion in weapons and claim that you want a ceasefire. I mean, people that fall for that, I don't think many people are falling for that. All right, so the next one here, Biden unveils $8 billion in military aid for Ukraine. So everybody gets $8 billion. President Biden on Thursday announced a massive military aid package for Ukraine. Well, it's not quite $8 billion. It's worth $7.9 billion. And he announced this ahead of his meeting with Zelensky at the White House. Biden said in a statement announcing the aid, quote, "Today I am announcing a surge in security assistance for Ukraine and a series of additional actions to help Ukraine win the war," end quote. So he's authorizing the use of $5.5 billion in the Presidential Drawdown Authority, and that's what gives them the power to send weapons straight from U.S. military stockpiles. So he's announcing that because I think I covered this last week. If that money's not used by the end of the fiscal year, which is September 30th, then it will be expired. They asked Congress to include some sort of extension in a continuing resolution that they passed this week, but they didn't include it. So Biden comes out and says, we'll just give it all to you. We'll give you $5.5 billion in weapons. So Biden said that he wanted to, quote, "ensure this authority does not expire so that my administration can fully utilize the funding appropriated by Congress to support the drawdown of U.S. equipment for Ukraine and then replenish U.S. stockpiles," end quote. So Biden also announced $2.4 billion in military aid using the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative, which allows the Pentagon to purchase weapons for Ukraine. The Pentagon said in a press release that this package will include air defenses, air-to-ground munitions, drones, counter-drone systems, and other equipment. And then a day earlier, as I covered yesterday, the Pentagon announced a separate PDA, Presidential Drawdown Authority package worth $375 million. So that puts the total military aid that the U.S. has promised to Ukraine just this week to $8.275 billion. Biden said that Ukraine would be receiving joint standoff weapons for the first time, and those are glide bombs with a range of about 70 miles. They can be fired by Ukraine's small fleet of F-16s. U.S. officials said that the glide bombs are going to be a cluster bomb variant. They're going to be packed with cluster bombs, which are banned by over 100 countries because they're completely indiscriminate and their history of killing and maiming civilians, but the U.S. has been dumping them into Ukraine. So that was, if you remember yesterday, U.S. officials said that package was going to include cluster bombs, air-to-ground missiles. They didn't specify which ones, but it looked like they wanted to save the announcement for when Zelensky was at the White House. So these are, again, the joint standoff weapons Biden said Ukraine will also receive more Patriot defense missile systems and that the U.S. would expand the training of Ukrainian soldiers, of Ukrainian pilots on F-16 fighter jets. So Zelensky is set to present Biden with his so-called victory plan, which I'm sure he did in the meeting, which U.S. officials, there was a report in the Wall Street Journal that cited U.S. officials who said they don't think Zelensky has any sort of clear strategy. Basically, what the victory plan is give us more military aid for a few years, and support long-range strikes inside Russia. That's another thing it looks like Zelensky is pushing hard for. Before I started recording this, I saw there's a report that says from the New York Times saying U.S. intelligence thinks that basically the risk of provoking a big retaliation from Russia is not the risk is not worth the reward, basically, for signing off on the long-range strikes. So hopefully that's a sign that they're not going to do it. But just a huge, huge payday here for the, military industrial complex that's going to get all these nice contracts to replenish this $5.5 billion in weapons that they're going to be sending to Ukraine. And they're also going to get some nice contracts for that $2.4 billion. Lots of money to be made here to continue this proxy war, even though Ukraine, there's no chance at victory as defined by Zelensky. All right, so the next one here, the Kremlin says that Russia's nuclear doctrine changes are a message to the West. So on Thursday, the Kremlin confirmed that the changes to Russia's nuclear doctrine that were outlined by President Vladimir Putin a day earlier were meant as a message to the West as NATO is considering supporting long-range Ukrainian strikes inside Russia. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said, quote, "This should be viewed as a certain message. This is a message that warns these countries of the consequences should they participate in an attack on our country by various means, not necessarily nuclear," end quote. So Putin said that the new doctrine will consider an attack on Russia by a non-nuclear state that's supported by a nuclear armed power as a joint attack, and it allows the use of nuclear weapons in response to a conventional attack that poses a critical threat to Russia's sovereignty. The doctrine will also allow the use of nuclear weapons in response to aggression against Russia and Belarus, very vague, and if Russia becomes aware of plans to launch massive airstrikes against its territory. So Russia's current nuclear doctrine only allows the use of nuclear weapons if Russia faces a nuclear attack or a conventional attack that threatens the existence of Russia. So this new doctrine certainly lowers the threshold for the use of nuclear weapons. And they're telling us it's a direct warning to the U.S. and NATO. Stop what you're doing. Stop this path of escalation, or, there's going to be a big response. So hopefully they listen to this. I put in some quotes here from Viktor Bondarev. He's a senator, a Russian senator. He told TASS that the changes to the nuclear doctrine were a response to, quote, "the constant growth of tension in the rhetoric and the direct actions in support of Ukraine on the part of the Western countries," end quote. He pointed to the U.S. and the U.K. discussing the idea of supporting the long-range strikes inside Russia, which Putin has said would mean NATO is at war with Russia. Bondarev said that he hoped, quote, "the U.S., Britain, and their puppets in the NATO bloc will have enough common sense not to bring the situation to the point of no return, deadly for the entire planet," end quote. He added, quote, "if necessary, I am sure that nothing will stop us from a retaliatory strike. That would mean the end of all life on the globe," end quote. So the Russians are pretty serious here. I really hope that the U.S. is not foolish enough to go ahead with this escalation. So remember, the U.S. and NATO are already supporting attacks on Russian territory in Kursk, just on the border regions. What the next escalation would be letting Ukraine use the Attacker missiles, the Storm Shadow missiles, to launch strikes deep inside Russian territory. And that seems to be where Putin has drawn a pretty serious red line. All right, so the next one here, Israel kills 39 Palestinians in Gaza and bombs a school. So Gaza's health ministry said Thursday that Israeli forces killed another 39 Palestinians and wounded 86 in the previous 24-hour period. The latest violence brings the ministry's death toll since October 7th 2023 to 41,534, and the number of wounded to 96,092. The toll is an undercount since it doesn't include the estimated 10,000 people who are missing and presumed dead under the rubble. The ministry said on Telegram, quote, "There are still a number of victims under the rubble and on the streets, and ambulance and civil defense crews cannot reach them," end quote. See the picture here of the aftermath of the strike at a school in the Jabalia refugee camp in northern Gaza. They hit that on Thursday. Al Jazeera reported that the strike on the Hafsa al-Fallujah school killed at least 15 people. Gaza's civil defense said the dead in the school strike included women and children. Israel took credit for the strike and claimed that it targeted a Hamas command and control center, but offered no evidence. That's what they always claim, even the one that killed on September 21st when they bombed that school in Gaza City that killed 13 children and 6 women. It killed 22 people and 13 children and 6 women. This was the one I was talking about. I saw the aftermath of the strike, some of the most horrific stuff I've ever seen. They claim that was a Hamas command and control center. I mean, it's a complete joke. So the slaughter in Gaza continues. And that's what, again, that $8.7 billion, the Israeli Defense Ministry says that this is for supporting our ongoing military operations. So that's exactly what it's supporting, that slaughter in Gaza. All right, the next one here, Gaza grandmother's story of survival and death in 1948 and 2024. This article is from Middle East Eye. I thought it was interesting. It's a story about a woman who was 97 years old. She died this year in Gaza, and she was expelled from her home by Zionist militias in 1948. And so she experienced that, and then she had to experience what's happened in Gaza over the past year in the last months of her life. She died in May. And it's an interesting story. It's if you want to go check it out, basically just to sum it up, her family is saying she had to move 10 times. She was displaced inside Gaza 10 different times during this thing. And the bombs, would always wake her up, and she had Alzheimer's. And, this is something you don't really think of. Like, I always think about what it's like for the parents having to go through this with children, but the elderly too. Imagine going through something like this with your grandma who lives with you, and you have to move her, and she has Alzheimer's. And I remember when my grandma was dying, she was from Ireland. She immigrated to the U.S. when she was like 13. When she was dying, she thought my dad was her brother. She was speaking Gaelic to him, and this was what was happening with her. She thought she was back home where she was initially expelled from by the Zionist militias, thought she was with her dad, talking about her home there. And meanwhile, where was she? She was in Gaza, which was being completely obliterated. It's just no rest for the people who in their lifetime were expelled and driven into Gaza, the refugees that make up the population of Gaza. So it's just an interesting story. And again, it's something you just don't think, I personally didn't think of too much as actually, the elderly people who have to deal with this and their family who have to take care of them. All right, so the next one here, Trump criticizes Zelensky for not reaching a deal. So on Wednesday, former President Donald Trump criticized Zelensky for not reaching a peace deal with Russia to end the war, saying that whatever agreement was possible would not be worse than the current situation for Ukraine. So Trump said at a campaign rally in North Carolina, and this was the same rally where he said all that horrible stuff about Iran that I went over yesterday, but he said some true things about the situation in Ukraine. He said, quote, "Those cities are gone. They're gone, and we continue to give billions of dollars to a man who refused to make a deal. Zelensky, there was no deal that he could have made that wouldn't have been better than the situation you have right now. You have a country that has been obliterated, not possible to be rebuilt. It'll take hundreds of years to rebuild it. There's not enough money to rebuild it. If the whole world got together, if they made a bad deal, it would have been much better," end quote. He also took a little shot at Zelensky. Well, that was a shot at Zelensky, but he said Zelensky was making aspersions toward him, and he apparently was referencing an interview that Zelensky did for The New Yorker that was published on Sunday, when Zelensky was asked about Trump's desire to end the war, and he said, quote, "My feeling is that Trump doesn't really know how to stop the war, even if he might think he knows how. With this war, oftentimes, the deeper you look at it, the less you understand. I've seen many leaders who were convinced that they knew how to end it tomorrow, and as they waded deeper into it, they realized it's not that simple," end quote. In the same interview, Zelensky called Senator J.D. Vance, Trump's running mate, too radical. And Vance has said that he favors a deal, where they freeze the battle lines and create some sort of demilitarized zone, guarantee Ukrainian independence and neutrality. And he's also said it should also include some sort of long-term U.S. military aid for Ukraine. So Zelensky said that about him. And Zelensky's at odds with some other Republicans too, including House Speaker Mike Johnson. Even though he's gotten him all this money, he upset him. And the reason why Johnson's upset, not because Zelensky's back in the U.S. demanding more taxpayer money, it's because Johnson didn't get an invitation to Zelensky's little tour of the bomb factory in Pennsylvania. Johnson wrote a letter to Zelensky demanding that he fire the Ukrainian ambassador to the U.S. because he went to that ammunition factory in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and didn't invite a Republican. So he's saying it's election interference. I'll read part of this letter, but just out of all the things for Johnson to get mad at Zelensky about, it's this. So Johnson said in the letter, quote, "I demand that you immediately fire Ukraine's ambassador to the United States, Oksana Markarova. The facility was in a politically contested battleground state, was led by a top political surrogate for Kamala Harris, and failed to include a single Republican because, on purpose, no Republicans were invited. The tour was clearly a partisan campaign event designed to help Democrats, and is clearly election interference," end quote. So he's upset, and I think he's referring there to Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania. He was there and signing bombs, signing artillery shells with Zelensky. And I mean, I don't know. I might not be in tune with the average voter, but I think that hurts the Democrats, signing bombs. You had Nikki Haley go over to Israel and sign an artillery shell, and here you have Shapiro signing one. I think it's a horrible look, but I don't know what most people think about that. I just thought it was funny that this letter, and you can go read the whole letter. It's just he's very unhappy about that. All right, so the next one here, I left up the one from yesterday about Trump, these bogus claims that Iran is trying to kill him. The next one here, Kenya to bolster a U.S.-backed police force in Haiti. So this one is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. After months of failing to make progress against paramilitaries in Port-au-Prince, Nairobi plans to surge thousands of armed Kenyans into Haiti over the next 4 months. Kenya is planning to deploy 2,500 soldiers, officially dubbed police, to Haiti in a U.S.-backed operation, a U.S.-funded operation. During his speech to the UN General Assembly on Thursday, Kenyan President William Ruto laid out his plan to surge troops into Haiti. He said 600 will arrive in the coming weeks, bringing the total to 1,000, and then by January 2025, he expects it to reach 2,500. He said the lack of funding, training, and equipment is slowing down the deployment of more troops to Haiti. The U.S. is the main backer of the operations and initially pushed for an international force to deploy to Haiti, but it seemed like they could just only get Kenya to do it if they paid the bill. I think the U.S. has committed like $200 million for this so far, but more is coming when it comes to the intervention in Haiti. All right, so the last story here, Japanese ship joins Australia, New Zealand in the Taiwan Strait. So this article is from the South China Morning Post, and I believe this is the first time since World War II that a Japanese ship was in the Taiwan Strait. So, of course, China is not happy about this. A Japan Maritime Defense Forces vessel sailed through the Taiwan Strait for the first time on Wednesday. Japanese media reported the move is likely to anger Beijing. It is sure to anger Beijing. And this is, so they say this is the first time that Japan sent a destroyer through the Taiwan Strait. But of course, Imperial Japan occupied, controlled Taiwan, Formosa, for a very long time. And so they definitely had some ships going through there then. The U.S. actually bombed Taiwan pretty good, Taipei, during World War II. I believe they might have firebombed it. I'm not exactly sure, but I know they firebombed some Chinese cities that were occupied by Japan. So anyway, the Japanese destroyer Sazanami conducted the transit in the company of vessels from the Australian and New Zealand navies through the narrow waterway between mainland China and the island of Taiwan, according to the Kyoto News Agency. They were believed to be heading to the South China Sea for exercises, the Kyoto report said. The U.S. regularly sends warships through the Taiwan Strait, and has been encouraging its allies to do the same. And that includes Britain and Australia. This is New Zealand's first time since 2017. We've also seen French warships go through there, Canadian warships go through there. The West is getting very close to China's shores, and China's not happy about it. So Wednesday's transit was the first confirmed journey through the Taiwan Strait by a Japanese naval vessel. China's Global Times, a popular nationalistic tabloid, also reported on Thursday that the Sazanami passed through the strait along with the Australian destroyer Sydney and the New Zealand supply ship Aotearoa. I think I pronounced that wrong. But anyway, they said that the Chinese military followed the ships through the strait. So we'll be hearing about this. We might see China respond. China does sail around the East China Sea, and there's some disputed islands there, the Senkaku Islands, that are controlled by Japan, but also claimed by China and Taiwan. They're pretty close to Taiwan, and China sails ships around there, and they've been kind of more active near Japan's southern islands. So maybe Japan will say this is a response to that, but I'm sure I wouldn't be surprised if we see China do something about this. I mean, we're talking about China and Japan here. There's a history, and this is they're not going to be happy about this. So that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our viewpoints. One from Daniel Larison: thanks to Biden, Lebanon is burning. One from Ted Snyder: do not risk calling Putin's bluff. One from Mike Marahi: war powers, the true history of John Adams and the quasi-war with France. One from Jonathan Cook: media complicit in the crimes of Israel. And one from James W. Carden: when odious foreign policy elites rally around Kamala Harris. So that is it. Go check out our blog. We have Ron Paul's and Daniel McAdams' great show, The Liberty Report, reposted in there. Kyle Anzalone's show, Conflicts of Interest, talking about the White House, the lies that Iran is behind assassination attempts. Lots of good stuff there. So that's it for me for the week. I hope everyone has a good weekend. To support this show, share it, tell your friends about antiwar.com, like, subscribe, comment. All that stuff really helps out. Follow us on social media, Instagram and on X. All that stuff is very good. You could leave a rating or a review if you listen to the audio to the podcast, which is most of you. I know a lot of people listen to this show on their way to work in the morning or while they're working in the morning, which is really cool. I'm always happy to hear about how certain people listen to this show. It's cool to know that I'm part of a lot of people's daily routine. So anyway, I will be back in a few days. Thanks for listening.